and physics at Harvard University. He is the science editor at WCVB-TV in Boston. He now has honest work, however, in that he is with us. Michael, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Charlie. Off to a rip-roaring start.
Yeah.
A month ago, I visited Egypt. It's the land where science and technology began. And for me, the trip was a special thrill because I was able finally to see face-to-face some of the things I had spent so much time studying. Things like the pyramids and mummies. Ironically, the tools of modern science are at work in Egypt today, helping us to understand some of her ancient scientific mysteries. Egypt is like a huge open-air museum. Here, as nowhere else, the very old coexists with the very new, as though time had no meaning. By far the most ancient structures in Egypt are the pyramids. Most of them were built 5,000 years ago, which makes them the oldest stone monuments in the world. Inside each pyramid, there are passageways like this that lead to burial chambers, temples, and even storerooms full of treasures. For centuries, scientists have searched these passageways, but they've yet to find the pyramid's most secret chambers. All that's changed now as scientists use X-rays and radar to see through the stone. The results have been surprising.
Dieter and Dorothea Arnold at the Metropolitan Museum in New York were excavating some Middle Kingdom pyramids at Dashur, and they did find a previously unknown chamber of a Middle Kingdom queen that actually had material in it.
The ancient Egyptians thought of pyramids as ladders to the sun. But why did Egyptians choose to build these giant tombs in the shape of a pyramid? Here is an interesting new theory.
If you go into the Egyptian desert, in the boondocks, where there is absolutely nothing, you find a conical hill. And you wonder whether the Egyptians had seen these things and built their monuments in their shapes because they wanted them to remain for eternity.
Pyramids are aerodynamic, and that's why they can survive sandstorms for thousands of years.
And I believe that if the structures that the ancient Egyptians had built were built in a shape of a square or a donut or anything else, they would have long gone.
Nearly as old as the pyramids and just as mysterious is this 3,000-year-old mummy of the pharaoh Ramses II. It's not normally on public display, but with special government permission, we were allowed to photograph this once most powerful man on earth. For centuries, people have wondered how the ancient Egyptians managed to preserve a body this well and for this long. But now, thanks to modern chemical analysis, scientists think they've discovered the secret.
The body would be dried, and the organs and the body would be mummified in a substance called natron, which is a naturally occurring salt found in areas in Egypt. The brain, in very early times, was left in place. We can see this on X-rays and CAT scans that have been done of our mummies. It was very important for the deceased to have a body that survived so that he would be able to achieve the afterlife, and so that the soul would have a place to come back to receive the offerings that were left for the deceased in the tomb.
For every discovery scientists make about Egypt's ancient and glorious past, there are hundreds of mysteries that remain unsolved. But science is patient, and like the great Egyptian sun god Re, it may rest, but it will never quit.
Michael, one interesting thing. You were talking about the theories behind why it was a pyramid. I thought there was some, or have I not read, that there was some astronomical purpose to that.
Yeah, the pyramids, or some of them at least, are lined up to the North Star. And that's because the ancient priests used them to keep track of the heavens so that they could predict things like eclipses and when the Nile would flood. And of course, that kind of knowledge meant power. In many cases, that's why the priests were more powerful than the pharaoh.
Yeah. Is that the prevailing theory, then, that that was the prime purpose?
That's not the only purpose. I mean, they were also used as burial places for the pharaohs. Sure. I mean, they were buried within these pyramids to protect their souls and their bodies. So it had many purposes, astronomical and funereal.
All right. Again, you talked about the mummies as well. And I was interested to hear, the organs were preserved as well as the bodies, but inside the body or outside?
No, the guts and the liver and the kidneys were taken out and put in vessels and kept there in what they call canoptic jars.
But the brain kept in?
Well, for a while. Afterwards, they actually extracted the brain through the nose because they thought the brain was not worthless. They thought the seat of intelligence was in the heart, not the brain. Little did they know, right?
Still a question with some people that's debated. Michael Gillen, thanks very much for being with us. It's
By far the most impressive structures in Egypt are the pyramids. Most of them are 5,000 years old, and that makes them the oldest stone monuments in the world. The famous Great Pyramids are located just outside of Cairo on the west bank of the Nile. And beautiful as they are, it's nothing compared to what they looked like when they were brand new.
Most archaeologists believe that the pyramids of Giza were covered with a very nice layer, and that layer was colored, and that colored layer had the whole history written on the outside, and it has long gone with the weather and rain and wind and so on.
In some cases, pyramids are lined up perfectly with the North Star. That's because ancient priests used pyramids to keep track of the heavens and to predict yearly events like the flooding of the Nile every summer. Pyramids were also used to commune with the gods. Ancient Egyptians thought of pyramids as stairways to the sun and buried their pharaohs deep within the stone. Inside each pyramid, there are passageways like this that lead to burial chambers, temples, and even storerooms full of treasures. For centuries, scientists have searched these passageways, but they've yet to find the pyramid's most secret chambers. In some ways, the most mysterious thing about a pyramid is its shape. Farouk El-Baz has a theory.
If you go into the Egyptian desert, in the boondocks, where there is absolutely nothing, you find a conical hill. And you wonder whether the Egyptians had seen these things and built their monuments in their shapes because they wanted them to remain for eternity.
According to El-Baz, pyramids are aerodynamic, and that's why they can survive sandstorms for thousands of years.
I believe that if the structures that the ancient Egyptians had built were built in a shape of a square or a donut or anything else, they would have long gone.
From the very beginning, pyramids had a deep symbolic meaning to the Egyptians. The four corners of a pyramid represent the four elements of creation: earth, air, fire, and water. And the triangular face of a pyramid, that represents the sacred Trinity. The sacred Trinity consisted of three gods who protected a pharaoh in the afterlife. The deceased pharaoh would spend an eternity with these gods, and not merely in spirit, but in body as well. This is the 3,000-year-old body of the pharaoh Ramses II. For centuries, people have wondered how the ancient Egyptians managed to preserve a body this well and for this long. But now, thanks to modern chemical analysis, scientists think they've discovered the secret.
The organs and the body would be mummified in a substance called natron, which is a naturally occurring salt found in areas in Egypt. Probably they heaped this dry natron all around the body and packed the body cavity with it. It was essentially the same thing as drying out fish.
It took 70 days to mummify the body of a pharaoh. After that, priests would utter 714 prayers to facilitate the pharaoh's passage into the afterlife. Only then was the pharaoh sealed into his tomb. According to the movies, curses were placed on sealed tombs so that the pharaoh's afterlife would not be disturbed. But are curses fact or fiction? In 1922, scientists who opened the tomb of Tutankhamun suddenly started dying one at a time. Some people say it was coincidence. Others say it was the pharaoh's curse.
Only God knows. There is really no scientific evidence to rule it out. I don't think there is any scientific evidence to prove it, but there is definitely no evidence to rule it out. So I wouldn't discount it.
No matter how level-headed you are, it's hard not to be captivated by the mysteries of ancient Egypt. 5,000 years ago, these pyramids protected the mummies of once great pharaohs. And today, they protect hundreds of secrets that only now we are beginning to understand. There is an old saying in Egypt, man fears time, but time fears the pyramids. That's a wonderfully poetic way of saying that pyramids were built to last. They had to last if they were to protect the bodies and souls of the pharaohs buried within them. As you've seen, the pyramids are not in perfect shape today, but after 5,000 years, consider this. They are the only one of the original 7 ancient wonders of the world to survive.
Just to photograph an ancient Egyptian boat encased in a tomb without touching or damaging the vessel. Today, the National Geographic Society released pictures of the project, which began 3 years ago. Scientists used a special drill to cut through limestone. They penetrated the tomb where the boat was buried 4,600 years ago and used a special camera to take these pictures.
This way that archaeology is no longer a grave robbing activity or a destruction, a way of destroying things until you get the artifacts. It's no, because the site itself might be an artifact to keep it intact the way the ancients had left it. So this is really getting a way of departing from the archaeology the way it was.
The scientists were hoping to get a sample of ancient air, but instead they found modern pollutants had filled the chamber. Now, if you're interested, the April issue of the National Geographic magazine will have more on this project.